Hello and welcome to Perspectives on the Synod. I'm Deacon Pedro, and joining me this week is Sebastian Gomes, and fresh off the plane from Rome, Emilie Callan. So good to have you back.
Good to be back.
The Synod is over. We're going to get to speak about the final document, also about the Holy Father's closing address. But first, here's our headlines. On Sunday, October 28th, the Synod on Young People officially concluded with Mass, celebrated in St. Peter's Basilica. All the Synod Fathers and delegates, including the young auditors, were present. In his homily, Pope Francis reflected on Jesus' encounter with Bartimaeus and emphasized three important lessons for implementing the Synod. First, listening patiently and openly to young people. Second, being a good neighbor, accompanying each other by being close to each other. And third, bearing witness to the liberating message of Jesus rather than offering our own ideas and prescriptions. Faith has to do with encounter, not theory, the Pope said. He concluded by thanking the Synod participants for their witness and asked the Lord to bless the next steps of the journey. A day earlier, on Saturday, October 27th, the Synod Fathers voted on the final document and approved all 167 paragraphs by a 2/3 majority. Like the working document, the final document is divided into three parts. It uses the Emmaus story from Luke's Gospel as a biblical reference for the Synod's desire to accompany young people today. Central to the document is the call to holiness and the desire for a church that accompanies people and welcomes all. But the document also addresses very practical realities: migration, human trafficking, Christian persecution, loneliness, inadequate formation, the Church's failures in dealing with clergy sex abuse, and a call to involve women in decision-making. The document expresses great confidence and hope in young people, saying that their contributions to the Church are fundamental for its renewal. We're going to be getting into the final document very shortly, but first, Emilie, you're just back.
Yes.
How are you feeling?
Well, there's a lot to still process, I think,
Yes.
because it's 4 weeks, there's a lot happening, and at the end of it, there's a lot of emotions because you've worked hard with the auditors, you spent that much time with the auditors, with the Synod Fathers, and so you've kind of been living in a bubble for 4 weeks. I would say that coming out of the Synod, everyone, at least it seemed that way, was experiencing a lot of joy and a lot of hope. Yeah. At the conclusion of the Synod, after the Mass, there was a really great scene that not many people got to see unless someone videotaped it, and not videotaped it, but
yes.
filmed it on their camera. It's like, what year are we in?
Yeah.
Right? But that some auditors filmed it on their camera, and at the end of the procession, the auditors and the Synod Fathers found themselves together inside the St. Peter's Basilica in a hall. And when the Synod Fathers arrived, the auditors started clapping and chanting and cheering and thanking the Synod Fathers, and it was really just an expression of the joy and the gratitude that we we had been feeling for living this experience together for those 4 weeks. And we even started singing "Jesus Christ, You're My Life," which had become kind of a theme song at the Synod. So again, just that little moment was one small expression of what we were feeling at the end of the Synod. Yeah. So I think that there's still so much to unravel and to unpack.
And we're going to try to unravel a little bit of that right now. I know people are eager to talk. You're eager to talk about that final document, and we have so many questions about where we go from here now that the Synod is over. But so this final document, as of the taping of this program, the translation is not available. So it's available in Italian. But Emilie, you were there, the vote happening in the room.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that experience.
So this was really the first time on Saturday when the final draft was, the final document was finally distributed, and we had a hard copy on the Saturday morning. And we were able to hear, so there was being read out loud in the Synod Hall, and we were getting simultaneous translation. So it was the first time that we were really getting an impression a better idea of what was kept in the document. And so there was a lot of anticipation, a little bit of nervousness. It was a long process. It was a long day because you're reading everything out loud. You're listening to translation. It's a lot of information to take in.
Right. So long day. You're probably still processing. What's your initial takeaway for you about the document as a whole?
The initial takeaway.
Yes, initial one.
One day. Okay. I would say that the Pope's homily gives a pretty good key to understanding what the main takeaway is of the document, because he talks about listening, about walking with, and then witnessing. And that came out quite often throughout in the interventions as well in our small groups, that really what it comes down to is there's young people want to be listened to.
Right.
They want to be their voice to have an impact in the church, to be a part of the mission of the church, and so that's what they're asking, and the church, the Synod Fathers were expressing that desire to do that as well, to understand where young people are at, and not just where young people are at in general, or where in a certain part of the world, but the need to listen to each person individually, to understand that person in their concrete reality, before we can speak a word of truth out of love into that person's life. So I would say that's probably the biggest takeaway.
I think that's a good one. I know Sebastian's you've been following the whole month. I know you've read the document in Italian. Takeaways for you?
Yeah, a couple of key takeaways, but I think what Emilie said about that little moment that you had at the end of the Synod is very telling, because when you read the document, you see a strong vote of confidence in young people. I wasn't expecting it to be that strong. I mean, there was a dispelling of fear, I think, a shortening of the distance between Synod Fathers and young people because of the presence of the 33, 34 of you who were there. And that relationship that matured over the course of the month, I thought really was expressed in the language that the Synod Fathers used in the document to say, we not only encourage young people to be protagonists in this whole mission that we call the church, but also to trust them and to say, you know things that we don't know, and we're okay with that, and we want to, as much as we want to walk with you, you also hopefully will walk with us. And I think that was a really key thing that came out. And another thing I would just say is a lot of the language was calling for like deeper anthropological, deeper theological, deeper pastoral elaborations. In other words, we don't have all the answers necessarily. I thought that was absolutely key. There was a number of paragraphs where they use that kind of language. And that's a humbling thing. I wrote about this on the blog the last week, that there's a humbling process that occurs. And I think we heard it from Cardinal Tagle in the show last week. Maybe we don't have all the answers when you're faced with the reality that Emilie was talking about. And I thought they did a wonderful job of admitting that, and to say we have to find solutions together, and the way forward is together.
3 of the paragraphs have to do with women in the church.
This was a huge issue, obviously, and Emilie was at the pre-synod meeting, right? And I remember that document had such a strong call.
It came out in each of the different parts of the final document of the pre-synod, and obviously in the Instrumentum Laboris as well, was something that, well, young people were wanting to talk about, right? So for sure, I would say there's a lot of continuity with the pre-synod and the Instrumentum Laboris. I think that's a natural thing that happened just because the pre-synodal document was quoted and used so much in the Instrumentum Laboris, and that's the document that we used as the basis of our work at the Synod. In terms of what came out with regards to women in the church, they were just putting an emphasis on the need, that it's almost like a duty, they said, a duty of justice, to have women included in decision-making positions, to
and
to
that's
have
the
a more
first time I
prominent
think
voice.
I've ever seen that kind of language. Speaking about involving women in decision-making processes. And the other thing was the call to make it happen at the local level. I mean, don't wait for the Vatican to, to put a woman in charge of a Vatican dicastery or something. Do something yourself. You have that ability to do that. And very, very strong call from the Synod Fathers to bring women in.
Okay, there was another paragraph, the paragraph that received the most no votes, so 65 votes out of 249, was paragraph number 150, which is the one that addresses, you know which one it is, sexuality and pastoral accompaniment of homosexual persons. The document says, the Synod reaffirms that God loves every person and so does the Church, renewing its commitment against every discrimination and sexually based violence. Equally reaffirmed is the determinative anthropological importance of the difference and reciprocity between man and woman, and it is held to be reductive to define a person's identity only by their sexual orientation. Is that reflective of the conversations that were taking place throughout the month?
I would say so. I think that even in our small groups, it's something that came out, you know, in some of our conversations. This idea as well of reciprocity, you know, because again, there was also talk about, you know, people were talking about complementarity or equality, and then that word reciprocity came out as being the better term to describe the relationship between men and women, right, and the desire to seek harmony within the church, just you know, between men and women, and that young people desire to see that kind of relationship lived out in a healthy way in the church. So that's one thing. When it comes to the topic of homosexuality, it's interesting that the term that was kept, you know, they didn't keep the LGBT acronym. There was a lot of misunderstanding. I think some people didn't really see that as didn't either understand the term. Some Synod Fathers, depending on where they were from, it was just not a term that they used or even really fully understood. And so there was a lot of even just cultural differences. And I think it was, in my opinion, a wise thing to not use it when it's not something that's shared across the board.
Yeah,
that was an interesting development. I think. It's always a contentious issue. Like you mentioned, like the words complementarity on one side or equality on the other side are weighted, right? They have, and then reciprocity. It seems like this was kind of this middle ground that came out of the discussions. But for me, honestly, the biggest thing is the firm call to get rid of any kind of discrimination against gay and LGBT people, and it's a very I feel like it's a very sincere call for the church, and extremely clear, because whatever we think or wherever we stand on the issue, the truth is that LGBT people are discriminated against, and even within the Catholic Church. So a firm stand by the bishops on that was absolutely essential.
Anyway, it's not fair to make it sound like the document only deals with women and people, you know, homosexual persons. Once the document is out in English, we will have lots more time to analyze it more deeply, because we need to move on to the Pope's closing address. As customary, the Pope will conclude the Synod by giving a final address after the document has been approved. And here is a little bit of what the Holy Father had to say.
Due cosine che le porto a cuore. Primo,
there are two things that are close to my heart. First, to reiterate once more that the Synod is not a parliament. It's a protected space for the Holy Spirit to act. For this reason, the information that is given is general, and it's not of very particular things, but it's a way of saying things, which is how the Holy Spirit works in us. And this is a protected space. Let's not forget this. It was the Spirit who worked here. The second thing is that the result of the Synod is not a document. I said that at the beginning. We have plenty of documents. I do not know if this document will have any effect on the outside. I don't know. But I certainly know that it must have an effect in us. It must work in us. We have drawn up the document. We had the commission. We studied it. We approved it. Now the Spirit gives us the document so that it may work in our heart.
destinatari dei documenti.
We are the recipients of the document, not the people outside.
Perché questo documento lavori e fare preghiera col
For this
documento.
document to work, we must pray with the document. We have to study it. We have to ask for light. It is for us mainly.
Principalmente. Sì, aiuterà
Yes,
tanti
it's to help
altri.
many others as well, but the first recipients are us. And it is the Spirit who has done all of this and brings it all the way back to us. Please do not forget that. And a third thing, I think of our Mother, the Holy Mother Church.
Gli ultimi 3 numeri sulla santità.
The last 3 paragraphs in the document on holiness show what the church is. Our mother is holy, but we children are sinners. We're all sinners. Let us not forget that expression of the fathers, the casta meretrix, the holy church, the holy mother with sinful children.
E a causa dei nostri peccati, sempre il grande accusatore che profitta.
And because of our sins, the great accuser always takes advantage. Just like the first chapter of Job says, he goes around the earth looking for someone to accuse.
In questo momento ci sta accusando forte.
At this moment, he is accusing us strongly. And this accusation also becomes persecution. Like the president today, Patriarch Sacco, said, his people, the church in Iraq, are persecuted, as are so many others of the East and in other places. And it becomes another type of persecution, these continuous accusations that soil the church. But the church must not be soiled. Her children, yes, we are all soiled, but the mother is not. And this is why it is time to defend the mother. And the mother is defended from the great accuser with prayer and penance. This is why I asked in this month that ends in a few days to pray the rosary, to pray to Saint Michael, the Archangel, to pray to Our Lady, to always cover Mother Church. Let us continue to do this. It is a difficult moment because the accuser attacking us attacks the mother. But the mother is not to be touched. I want to say this from the heart at the end of the Synod.
That was the Holy Father during his final address. He said 3 things that that we pointed out. That Synod is not a parliament. That's one thing. That the result of the Synod is not a document. That's the second thing. And then this whole thing about the accuser and you cannot touch the mother. Emilie, you were there listening to him. What was going through your mind?
So I'm actually going to focus on something you didn't mention
oh, okay.
in the 3 points, which was right at the beginning of his speech. He spoke about the fact that this environment was that the Synod was a protected environment. And the reason that struck me so much is because I think that when we're in conversation, we're in deliberations, and we feel like all this information is being shared with the world, right? Like everyone has access to it and can say what they want about it. And so the fact that the Pope just affirmed the fact that this is a protected environment because we had the freedom to speak, and then we came out with the result of this document based on our conversations that were done in a lot of freedom, and I think that that's really important to remember, that what came out of this wasn't decisions about certain things, but that we're just kind of putting it all out there, and that we had the safety, and that the Pope is saying this is safe, this is safe, and we shouldn't forget that.
Yeah, that's true. For me, actually, that is one of the most important things about the whole Synod journey. What do you think, Sebastian?
I mean, the fascinating thing is that for all this talk that we've just done about the final document, he says the Synod is not about a final document.
Yes. No, it's great. No, you're right.
That's the key thing.
Yes.
It goes back to this whole thing that the Synod is about the journey and not about the destination. And I think what he wanted to hit home is what Emilie kind of touched on there, that we felt something here.
Yes.
We experienced something inside this synod, and it's that experience that you need to go and witness to out there. So you need to go and recreate that in your local churches, no matter who you are.
Exactly.
And that's the big takeaway. The whole thing about the Great Accuser, I mean, we could talk about, we have a
that's
whole show on that. There's a lot of
conversation.
speculation about that, but it's true that and it's part of what you said, that there's these voices from the outside who don't have the whole picture, who weren't part of the experience, who are looking and reading into the synod with their own ideological lenses. And then you have the whole thing with Archbishop Vigano, that's a recurring topic in the church these days. So there's lots of these conversations going on. I think the Pope just wanted to acknowledge that this comes from within a lot of the time. It's not an external persecution of the church. It's something that the devil is working within. It's something we should just be conscious of.
And it's something that we need to keep in mind.
Yes.
Anyway, we're going to take a little break. It's a quick break. When we come back, we're going to continue this conversation. What are the implications of this synod for the church? So don't go too far away. Okay, we're back. There's one last thing that I wanted to say about this final document, because this whole show about the final document is not really about the final document. The final document is really like the minutes of the meeting that you just had for a month. It's not like it's a doctrinal document. We're not redefining church doctrine here. It's just like this is a record of what took place. So there were some things that were new at this synod. You've been to 4 synods? 3.
Yeah.
You've been very involved in this one. Tell me about that 3-minute pause for silence, which is new, right? Hadn't been done
we never
before.
had that. People used to give interventions for like an hour and a half straight, 5-minute or 4-minute talks. So yeah, that was a novelty with this one.
So what was that like? Did it have an impact, having those 3 minutes of silence?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say concretely what kind of fruit.
Compare.
We can't compare. It's hard to say too what kind of fruit came out of that. I know that a lot of people did appreciate having that time, because it gave you time to reflect on what was just said. So you listened to 5 interventions, 5 4-minute interventions, and during that 3 minutes, it was just silence. And even sometimes the moderator for that day would say, we heard this morning this beautiful homily, or the gospel this morning was this,
right.
and so the moderator would sometimes remind us of what we had heard during our prayer times, and say, maybe I invite you to reflect on this question or on this. So it was really a time to pray, not just.
No, but you see, I think that this is a great example of how this synod, that they were living in the synod what the synod is about.
Totally.
It's like if the whole point was about listening, then you're creating a space that allows you to listen, even if it's just listening to your own reflection.
And that's the great thing about this whole development of synodality in the Catholic Church under Pope Francis. When we heard, there was a lot about synodality in the final document, and it raised some questions, because people were like, oh, we weren't really talking about synodality, but the people who were writing the document were seeing what we're talking about. That the people are in the synod are living synodality, which is living, journeying together, listening to each other, mutuality, breaking down barriers, understanding people's context, understanding the difficulties, the challenges, admitting that you don't always have the answers. I mean, when those walls kind of break down and you realize we're all in this together, you're able to then the Spirit's able to work in that, and you're able to find solutions that maybe you had never thought of before, and it's just, that is what propels the church forward. That's what Francis believes, and that's what this synodality thing is all about.
Well, tell me, are we a more synodal church now than we were October 1st?
Absolutely, and the key thing is that the 300 people who were at this synod have experienced it personally. So synodality is like a thing that it's like really good community. Like once you experience it, once you live it, then you know when it's like not present out there. And then you can be like, this could use a little bit more synodality. We could use a little bit more listening here. And that's, I think, the hope. That's how it spreads.
They've experienced it, so then they can actually bring it, which is the whole point
and that's
about
bring it
live
back
it in your own
that's
communities.
Right. That's right.
Emily, you, the whole thing about young people participating in the synod, and we heard officially and extra officially about how the bishops themselves spoke about that impact that it was on them to have you guys around. What did young people have to say about the impact that you may or may
Right.
not have had on the bishops or on the synod?
Well, I think it went both ways. It was just as much a witness to the bishops to have us there, I think, to interact with us. I know that for them, what they appreciated was our enthusiasm. I mean, that sounds almost like very, you know, stereotypical, sure. But it's true that, you know, we were very spontaneous in the way that we reacted to some of the interventions or things that were said in the synod, or the votes. Yes, it's true. It's true. Even in the votes, yeah. So there was a lot of spontaneity. They enjoyed having conversations with us and, you know, being in contact with us every day. But it was just as much of a witness for us because we felt really, you know, you're talking about breaking down the distance, and I would say that that's very true. It felt like we were a lot closer to the church, not just because we were there at the Vatican, but because we got to have these conversations with the Synod Fathers on a daily basis. And I would say, you know, the experience of the small groups, the small working groups, was probably the best way that we could have done that. Right, I said that a couple weeks ago. Exactly, it was a highlight because that allowed you to have these deep conversations that otherwise wouldn't have happened. And I thought, well, imagine if that did happen back home, you know, where there was that kind of freedom, and it was just fascinating to.
Isn't it already happening? We know that certain bishops are adopting similar synodal with young people formats.
We saw a tweet the other day about from Bishop Frank Cajano, who's from Bridgeport, Connecticut, saying this whole experience has inspired me to do so. Have a whole year of kind of collaboration and consultation with the young people in the diocese. Do
you think that this is that? So we're talking about now. What's next? Is this something that you think we're going to see in dioceses all over the world?
You know, it does depend a lot on the bishops still. I mean, this is still we're still a community of faith where the successors of the apostles have a lot of authority and a lot of, so depending on the amount of inspiration that they're coming out of that experience with, they can help make room for the Holy Spirit to operate in their diocese in remarkable ways if they're a little bit open and a little bit inspired. So that's the hope. And then the more people that over the years experience this, we'll try to share it with the rest of the church.
What are your hopes?
Well, I was just thinking when you were speaking about one of the few last lines of Pope Francis's homily at the closing mass, and I would hope that were to happen. You know, this idea of being in conversation and of experiencing synodality in our local churches, and I just keep thinking about relationship. How, you know, when we talk about evangelization,
that's what it is.
You know, if you want to share faith with people, it has to happen in relationship. And Pope Francis said, you know, when you meet young people or when you're meeting people, are they feeling more the weight of the institution, or are they actually encountering the love of God?
Yes.
And I thought that's so true, right? Because we can, what is it that we're actually bringing to people? And because the institution is there, we know it's there, and it's there for a purpose, but it's also there because it has to help us do the work of evangelization and share.
Yeah. And not only the institution is there, but the teaching is there, and the teaching is solid, and nobody's saying anything about that. We're talking about how we relate to people and listen to people, and that's what synodality is all about. Anyway, I'm sure that this conversation is going to continue. It's continuing in your homes, continues on our website, saltandlighttv.org/synod. That's where you can read all the documents, watch all our programs related to the synod. If you missed part of this program, that's where you can watch it in its entirety. Thank you for being with us. Thank you to Sebastian Gomes.
Thank you.
You're becoming a bit of a synod expert. And Emilie Callan, we can stop saying that you're an auditor at the synod. You're back now with us, producer Emilie Callan. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
And thank you. Until we meet again, God bless.